Test.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear students, dear guests, I may say. Welcome to the Science Café, organized as part of the T4U Europe network and its activities by our Transformation Lab for Critical Heritage, which is organized within the Transform for Europe Alliance, and also by our UNESCO Chair for Heritage Interpretation and Education for Enhanced Integrated Heritage Approaches based at the University of Primorska. For those who might not be acquainted what is T4EU or Transform for Europe, this is an European university network of 10 universities, mostly working on the border areas in countries Poland, Germany, Italy, France, Estonia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Slovenia, Spain, Portugal, and Ukraine as an associated partner. The transformation labs organized and established within this project and initiative are working as trans-university research groups connecting researchers from different fields but linked by similar topics. In this, we join forces in research, joint publications, education, and different public events. One of these is also today's event, Science Café. We decided to focus it on two interconnected topics. On one hand, the critical heritage and critical heritage studies, which lies in the core of our work and work of our researchers at the Faculty of Humanities, University of Primorska, and also the topic of ICOM yearly theme. This is research and practice in rapidly changing world. This was also the topic of the summer school that is taking on this week at the Faculty of Humanities. The UNESCO Chair for Heritage Interpretation and Education for Enhanced Integrated Heritage Approaches, together with the Department of Archaeology and Heritage, is also active member of this transformation lab. And today's Science Café takes the format of what the name says, conversation, debate over a cup of coffee. We all have it, I hope, between two researchers, between two scientists, in a fluid, unstructured, inspirative dialogue where they confront and debate over the central topic from the points of view of their expertise and, of course, their personal experience. And, of course, after the dialogue, which will last about 40 minutes or so, we will also open debate to the public, to you, if you would like to comment, make a question, and so on. We have two guests here today. I say guests because you are guests, although one of them is from our university. But first, we are extremely happy to have among us and that we can welcome our dear colleague Daniela Koleva, an associate professor at the Department of History and Theory of Culture at the Sofia University. She is an expert in the field of oral history and anthropology of socialism and post-socialism, biographical and cultural memory, biographical methods, aging studies, social constructionism. Her recent publication reflects her latest engagement and is entitled Memory Archipelago of the Communist Past, Public Narratives and Personal Recollections. Daniela will be conversating and talking with our colleague, Assistant Professor Neža Čebron-Lipovec from the Faculty of Humanities, from the Department of Archaeology of Heritage, and member of our UNESCO chair. She is an art and architecture historian, specialized in built heritage conservation and later in heritage studies, and her research focuses on participation and heritage conservation. She has been involved in several projects that bridge conservation practice and critical analysis of heritage discourses, particularly in historically contested multicultural sites as the region of Istria, here at the border of Slovenia and Italy. So the idea of today's event is to let our two speakers to debate after posing them one initial question to launch this debate. It is my pleasure to have this task. My name is Irena Lazar. This is something that I have forgot at the beginning. I am UNESCO chairholder, mentioned at the beginning as being one of the organizers of this event. And I am happy that begin with this question, which is a twofold. So, Daniela, which type of critical heritage do you engage with in your research? And also, what is the impact of the rapidly changing world that you encounter in this regard? So, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irena. Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be back to Koper after last year's summer school here. And thanks everybody for spending your late afternoon with us. I am very well aware that Koper offers many options of having a good time, especially at this time of the year. Speaking about critical heritage and how I engage with it and how I try to engage my students also with it, my main field of research and teaching is the heritage of the recent past of socialism, and how it can be, if it can be accommodated in our present world. And speaking about critical heritage, we think about the changing messages, the message, what this item, this building, this monument, this could be song or film or whatever, what does it tell us and how? And also, who is speaking through it and to whom? What are the messages? Because we are, unlike the initial, the original meaning of the word heritage, which comes from probably legal studies, and as inheritors of our predecessors, we receive heritage. My point, my thesis is that we actually choose heritage in terms of as culture, as communities, as nations, as collectives. We actually choose, we select our heritage. We select what we value and want to preserve. For example, almost everywhere in Southeastern Europe, in the Balkans, probably except Bosnia, Ottoman heritage is not very highly held, let's say so. So in this sense, it is not heritage, not something that we desire, but still it is there. So there's the idea of what to do with it, how to handle it, what would be the messages that it can convey. It somehow happened that in the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, with the replanning and restructuring of the major Bulgarian cities, somehow it always happened that a major street or a major square will replace a Muslim mosque, for example, or an Ottoman bath. So in this way, this already tells us about the relation or the lack of relation towards the lack of evaluation, the lack of valuing of this heritage. Much closer to us, we now have the question of what to do with all those hundreds, actually, of monuments left from the from socialism, from the communist regime, and especially those which did convey very explicit and powerful political and ideological messages. So speaking of critical heritage and critical evaluation of cultural heritage, there's this series of jokes about the Armenian radio or Radio Yerevan, which was once asked, is it possible to predict the future? And the answer was, well, yes, of course, that's even easy. The difficult thing is the past. The past is the one that keeps changing all the time. So critical heritage is about how our time changes and how our past changes as embodied in all those items that we call heritage, material or otherwise. So I have in mind a specific example that I would like to show, but maybe shall I do it now with Giga, please? The folder is called The Saucer. And the saucer is on the top of the mountain. It's a monument to the Bulgarian Communist Party. Giga is now showing how it looked inside. If you just go on with the pictures, and we will see it outside. It looks like a flying saucer, like a spaceship from the outside. this is how it looks inside now. And this is a project a few years ago which was called Monument. It was an international one, and I can see that some of you know about it. And monument is because it deals with monuments which lost their meaning or which changed their meaning. And this is part of the exhibition. This is why saucer, because of this shape. And last year, I accompanied a group of German colleagues dealing with heritage and journalists who write about culture. We went there. We cannot go inside because it's dangerous right now. And one of them said, it's too unique to be left to decay. Okay, we won't leave it to decay, maybe. But now the question is, what would be the message? And here we had a great we do have ongoing discussions with architects. For the architects, the monument, they perceive the monument as a materiality. For them, the materiality is leading, and it's unique, and it should be preserved or restored as it is. For us, cultural studies people and historians, somehow more important is what would be the message that it will carry. So we are making steps towards each other, in a very not always patient, but it's quite difficult because all of us have to leave our space of comfort, of professional comfort, and try to go to the others and try to kind of engage with their point of view. So there's a lot to be done, and it's not only in terms of funding, like finding funds to repair the roof and all that. This is difficult, but it's much easier than rethinking, resignifying, if you will, finding a new or crafting the new messages that the monument will carry, that the saucer will carry. And even the word saucer is a kind of, tactical everyday appropriation. It dates back to the 1980s when the Bulgarian people, not very excited about the monument to the Bulgarian Communist Party, just call it the saucer. So what will now the saucer signify and what it will tell and to whom? It's really a very big and difficult question. That's in terms of one example to illustrate what critical heritage is about and how, and one way to engage with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. Daniela gave so many starting points to hook on and continue, but perhaps I will link to what we just experienced before we close the main door of this room where we are, because it somewhat provides part of the answer to the question. So what is the critical heritage or the heritage that we have to critically engage with in my case, in my research, so in this region, because I work on this region, and what questions this rapidly changing world opens. For those who are not here with us, have not had the pleasure to hear the music coming from the main square just next door, which was traditional folk music from continental Slovenia, that is somewhat out of place, one would say, in this context, but it was played. Why? Why? Because the city has become a quite popular tourist site, particularly of cruise ships over the last 10 years. So it's basically creating or staging composite identity, to say it in mild words. It, of course, opens the question for us researchers, who inhabits this space? What are the groups, and what do these groups of inhabitants value in this space? In which artifacts or cultural resources in our surrounding they identify with, tangible or intangible? And this then leads me straight forward to my research, because in many points it links with Daniela's. My core research started with the analysis of the post-World War II creation and urbanization of this very tiny part of the coast, that is Slovene coast or the northern Istria, that was subject to major population changes through the whole 20th century. And therefore subject to major changes in its architectural image and identity. And this is the majority, or the one that is most visible and identified, is exactly the period of socialism. That definitely left a mark. And here I would then like Žiga to just open the other one, so the PowerPoint, and just with the starting image. All those of you who know Koper know the view and know why we are showing it. But let's explain. You see, this is the view from the bell tower, and you can immediately spot one building that springs out of the majority, and it's called the Tomos skyscraper. And for me, this is an idiomatic case of what critical heritage should engage with. But not only the architecture itself, of course, but the related discourses, the dissonances within, because there are plenty, and especially its fate. Because as Daniela brought out the temporality issue, it is a major issue when we talk about critical heritage. We like to think in a nostalgic and romantic way that heritage is about the past, but heritage is about ourselves today. It's about the present and how we today mobilize the past to make sense of our present. Yeah? And of course, as time passes by, this attitude changes. And this is also how these different critical heritages, or heritages that bear inherent dissonances, change over time. And just briefly, it is a building that was built indeed in the late 1950s, when this area became part of Yugoslavia. For basically the first time in history, this region was governed by a Slovene-speaking majority in becoming at the time. And so within a major urban plan, also this skyscraper, 10-story skyscraper, was built. Yeah, the images that you see right now, for those that can see the images, and I apologize for the people that are just watching online, it's the recent image of the skyscraper after it has been refurbished some 5 years ago or so. But if we go just one step further, we see how it looked like slightly different. I mean, for those of you in architecture, notice the difference. How it looked like before this major restoration project. It is emblematic for the debate about critical heritage for many reasons. In first place, because it was built as a housing encompassing 90 apartments, single apartments for workers of the strongest industry in the region, established also in the same period. And therefore it hosted incoming new inhabitants of the region. At the same time, as said, it was a major period of restructuring the identity of the city. Now, to make a long story short, if we try to identify its values, those of you in architecture will immediately recognize some typological solutions that we know very well. Even the small balconies can be traced back in the early modernist solutions, really going to the universal or generally university developed characteristics of modernism. But since it was built in the socialist spirit, it was considered as a monument of socialism primarily. And for that reason, it bore and still bears dissonances. On the one hand, it's an urban legend without real written proofs, but still that it was intentionally built as high to be higher than the bell tower of the main church. At the same time, it was built really to host the largest number possible of workers still in the city center that at that time was the only developed area. If we look at how it's been valorized in our present or in the last 10 years, perhaps slightly in a longer period, and I'll shortly make it clear why. It represents for some people a reference point. By some members of the local community, that is the local community that came to inhabit in the 1950s, the area, it was termed and publicly stated that it is definitely their monument, but especially a monument of a past that took care of its inhabitants. We can call it nostalgia. We can call it progressive nostalgia if we want, with this term coined by Gary Campbell and Laura Jane Smith. A very useful term, by the way, because progressive nostalgia means to take from the past, even a problematic past, the positive values that can help us envision the future. Yeah? And how this progressive nostalgia was addressing this building was exactly in highlighting the issue that it was the system, as the way it was done, but still it was the system taking care of its community. So that's, let's say, the positive valuing. Of course, then there is the negative, or let's say the value, it's being valued as difficult heritage for those inhabitants that don't identify, of course, with the socialist past. Of course, we have an additional layer of dissonance, and we can identify it in the ethnicity dimension. Yeah. So on the one hand, the inhabitants that had to leave the region in order, well, following these political upheavals, of course, identifying this the symbol of their trauma. And opposed again comes the identification with those that see in this building the identification of the moment of their settling. Now, this is, I promised a long story short. It was not that short, but to bring it to the end, to the contemporary, it is not anymore a worker's apartment. It is not anymore 90 apartments. Yeah. Plus, when it was built, it was very modern. It had the housekeeper. It had the breakfast room at the ground floor and cleaning lady and so on. Today, it is privately owned. I mean, it was bought by a developer, restored, and transformed into flats, which then change the surface with every next floor. And on the top floor, there is no more 9 apartments per floor, but it's a penthouse. So we could call this a quite clear example of gentrification. But keep in mind, 15 years ago, there was a public call for the redevelopment of the area, when the first ideas were to either, well, some of the proposals proposed the demolition of this building, some proposed to cut it in half. Finally, it was the Heritage Office that declared or identified its heritage values, mainly linked, of course, to architecture, but not solely. So this is then the result, and it's this switch to a liberal market and economy and so on that has the twin parallel in the tourism development now that we just heard outside. These are the current challenges. And to close my thought, a recent publication of ICROM, so the International Center for Restoration, dealing with anticipating futures for heritage, pinpointed one concept, and I shared it here with you. They highlight that it's not our task to forecast the future, but rather to foresee, to have foresight. Because forecasting means projecting, determining. Foresighting means getting prepared. And if I can, from here, throw it back to Daniela, because we had a nice, let's say, preparatory coffee for this science cafe, just pinpointing a bit which direction could our dialogue go. Because as you see, there are many topics that join our research, but still we come from regions that, well, did share some parts of history, but at the same time, although from the Western point of view, we were all East, but from the Slovenian and ex-Yugoslavian point of view, we were not the same East as the Eastern Bloc under the Soviet regime, because Yugoslavia was self-managed. So my question to Daniela is, if you could enlighten for the public here and online, how you explain to your students even the difference between heritage and legacy on this same on the monuments of the same period, and how can we, so what is the level of coercion that we identify in this span between heritage and legacy?
Thank you. Actually, I first going back to your example, I was thinking of who owns heritage, who has the say on what this is and what to do with it. And it comes to mind how the UNESCO Conventions of Cultural Heritage changed. The one from 1972 defined a decisive role for the experts who were going to say which criteria are met and so on. Well, the one on intangible cultural heritage from 2005 also referred to the community, something which is of value to the community. So this was a very interesting example, going back to the situation where this building was constructed, and kind of how it was now or recently renegotiated, and who had the final say. From what I understand, it was the experts, and I wonder what was the community's attitude, whether it was challenged or not.
Actually, it was finally the fact that it was preserved in its exterior. It was really a matter of the decision of the conservator in charge. So here we see there is a lot in the hands of the professional authorities. But we have to be aware that it was also in the hands of the very owner, because the whole building was bought by this developer who was the architect at the same time. And it was also his understanding. And we have to add that despite this quite obvious gentrification process, and I'm open for you and some of you I know that have been dealing with this to challenge this assumption of gentrification. But the issue was that this same developer, in an initial period of the after the renovation, when not all the flats were still were sold and so on, he allowed the ground floor to be used by a local association that was dealing exactly with what I would even call urban guerrilla. I mean, like participatory processes for the urban space. And it even hosted an alternative independent radio. So there was a certain level of understanding, but the moment it was completely sold, they were asked to move out. But it was a very strong community space, at least for one part, the younger part even. And the reaction of the community during the restoration was exactly strongly and loudly dissonant as the values it embodies. So on the one hand, it was then that it was called the best apartment buildings for single workers in the world. That was a statement by a lady who actually lived in there in the 60s. On the other hand, it was continuously repeated that this is a remnant of the difficult past that we won. I mean, that it's gone. So that's this constant ambivalence, and that's the dissonance that's completely, and we know from theory and practice, it's always inherent. But it did trigger, and it pinpointed very obviously what you pointed out with the intangible convention. And it's actually the intangible heritage that finally brought this need on the heritage field working table, the need for participatory approaches. So this is where also this region, and particularly in contested spaces, but everywhere actually, participation should, that's my personal professional opinion, should be the approach to treat heritage, at least when we talk about public heritage or heritage in the public space or public buildings. It's known that we have in the international field now the of the heritage practice, let's be clear, the theory is even further and very critical, but the heritage practice is promoting what we call people-centered approaches, which means placing the community at the very forefront. And it's 20 years ago that we got even European policies that put again the so-called heritage communities, but communities as such, at the forefront. Of course, and dealing again with the rapidly changing world, this poses us, the professionals, a major challenge, how to bring the policies on the ground and at the same time manage the dissonances. In Slovenia, we have one array of dissonances to deal with. Bulgaria is somewhat different.
In Bulgaria, we also have an array of dissonances, which I am even not sure that we should turn into consensuses. It's also about as I said, who owns the heritage. It's also about the empowerment of local communities. And you asked about heritage and legacy and the level of coercion and so on. And this brings to me brings to mind an example of a small town on the Danube where the largest communist forced labor camp was situated, the largest and the one which actually existed for decades. We now know one form or another. The name of the locality is Belene, and it has a very interesting and illuminating history of what I would call turning legacy into heritage, or heritageization, if you can stand this cumbersome word. Since the beginning of the 1990s, the truth about the existence of this camp became widely known in the public in Bulgaria, and Belene started. It became actually a symbol of the Bulgarian communist gulag. When somebody wanted to refer to repressions and forced labor and suffering, they would simply say Belene, and everybody would know. If you have read, or if you will read Georgi Gospodinov's the Physics of Sorrow, or something like this. I'm translating the title from Bulgarian into English. There is a reference to this, and it simply said the father went through Belene, crushed, and so on. So the author does know that everybody knows. So that's about this symbolic kind of this legacy that fell on the local community. And when I first went there in 2008, there was still this feeling of being demonized, being accused. One of the young people that we met there, he suggested to walk us, me and my students, through the town so that you see that we are not monsters. And he said that just normally, without any passion. So that was the legacy, the camp that put a stigma on this little town. And then gradually, but not spontaneously, actually following the first the efforts of the local Catholic priest, and then of some non-governmental organizations, the local community started to gradually accept, especially the younger people who had not been born at that time, started to gradually accept their own past and kind of work through this traumatic memory. And they also had a project, an international project with some organization from Croatia, which worked in Goli Otok, Spac in Albania, Sighet in Romania. So a few of these places, and gradually it turned into a part of the past which is kind of accepted and even somehow inscribed into the present identity. Now, part of the strategy of the local authorities is this kind of commemorative tourism. So we are now talking about tourism, about tourists who will come to Belene. Some of them will come to watch the water birds. It's a nature reserve, a nature park. Others will come to see the remnants of the forced labor camp. And this is how what I would call heritageization, and it's also can be observed, I guess, in Goli Otok and also some other places. In Goli Otok, there is a lot of competition between recreational tourism and commemorative tourism. Just like in Belene, there is some competition between historical and nature tourism on the one hand. Historical because there's an ancient fortress, an ancient castle. So this is a process which actually did not start initially within the community, which felt stigmatized, and there was a lot of what I would call cultivated ignorance. We don't know. We don't know. Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. We don't know. We just don't know. So this cultivated ignorance was gradually transformed, and now there is what I would call the kind of ownership on that past, or heritageization, or working through the trauma of the past.
May I just ask, so what in synthetically or watching from afar, what was then the impact of the tourism activity linked to it? Because tourism tends to banalize and over commodify particularly difficult heritage. What were your observations in this case? Was it different?
We are not that far yet with Belene. It's first. Let me start with who are the players. The player is a very small local NGO, and which is called Belene Island Foundation, and the local Catholic Church. Actually, the priest there, the Catholic priest, who kind of imported this memory culture, which was developed in Europe in relation to the Holocaust. So the Holocaust, in this sense, becomes something like a model on which to form the memory of the traumas of the communist regime. In relation to commodification, there is none yet, or actually none, because this foundation is a what's the word, not-for-profit entity, and they receive donations, they write projects, and they don't charge. There is no merchandise. Maybe I should say not yet. Yeah, and the interest towards Belen, as well as the one towards the Sosa that I showed, that I started with, falls in that kind of dark tourism kind of typology. So for the moment, there is not, maybe not yet, this kind of commodification. Although there is some infrastructure in the town itself, which is related mostly to the nature reserve, and also the town and the island was included in the educational, the suggestions, or let's say the menu for educational excursions, educational trips for school children. So it's at the moment it's more like educational and commemorative tourism, which is different from what we normally imagine as tourism. But maybe this is the problem that we can not forecast but foresee.
I just wanted to ask again, but also because it's a bit of an interconnected topic, going back to public monuments. So are public monuments, how are actually they being treated in Bulgaria? If it's possible to just give an estimate or just a sharp overview of course, of this difficult past.
That's a question for Žiga now again. There's one which is the monument to the Soviet Army in Sofia, a folder, which is one of the most contested ones because it's in the center of Sofia. It dominates the space. It's higher than the surrounding 5-6-story buildings, and this is how it was appropriated by young people in Bulgaria. This is the high relief. This is not young people. This is the Russian embassy. So it was very contested because of its very central place, and you can guess this is solidarity with Ukraine after the annexation of Crimea. But at the same time, the monument was used by Russophile political constituencies aided by the Russian embassy to mark the Victory Day. This is again a subversive art action which triggered a lot of discussions with then it says it says in step with the time, and you can probably recognize the Superman, the Santa Claus, Ronald McDonald, and American pop culture heroes. The Minister of Culture then said that this is vandalism, while some intellectuals, including some of my colleagues, actually argued that this is actually the way to re-signify the monument, to leave it to young people and to artists to import their own messages, or to use it as a kind of a blackboard to write on it their own messages. And I did ethnography of the Victory Day for a few years. This is one of them. On the left-hand side is the then ambassador, Russian ambassador, And however, yeah, and people would ask me, what is your personal opinion? Should the monument be demolished or should it stay? And for years and years, my personal opinion was that it should stay. And the way it was being desacralized and resignified, I found it very interesting. And I would joke that I would like it to stay because that's what I work. If it was not there, then what should I do? Well, I would have to work something else. But now it has been weaponized for the past couple of years, especially after the Russian invasion in Ukraine. It is no longer piece of heritage to be resignified, to be somehow engaged in art actions and festivals and things like that as it used to be before. It is now made a propaganda weapon, especially around the Victory Day, the 9th of May. And yeah, this is the flag of the Donetskaya Narodnaya Respublika, that part of Donetsk region which was occupied, maybe there is a and it is anti-NATO slogan. So now last year, actually, the monument was decapitated. Actually, this sculpture group, which is on top, was taken down. And that was made in the context of the Russian invasion in Ukraine and as part of a wave of demolishing monuments to the Soviet army all over Eastern Europe, actually. So that's one very contested case, which ended in this way. The monument, the pedestal is there, the sculptural group is not. It is now fenced all around, and it stands like a monument to the difficulty to engage with the past. And it's a kind of embodiment of dissonance now. But there are also other examples, like a local community in southwest Bulgaria, where the monument to the local partisan was, in the early 90s, it was taken to the regional museum, where they made a kind of a garden of such monuments. They did not demolish them, they just moved them to the museum garden. And then the local community signed a petition and they wanted their monument back. And with my students, I was on field work right at that moment, and we interviewed many people, also those who not only did not sympathize with the Bulgarian Communist and Socialist Party, but those who had been repressed by the communist regime. And one of those people said, it's not because he was communist, it's because he is ours. So the ours, the local identity, this part of the past which is turned into heritage in order to boost one or another local trait or to construct the local identity. I think that monuments and heritage are maybe undervalued, and they have a huge potential to be introduced in that play.
Just as a thought, it just reminds me of a rather recent article by Vaidos Petrulis. I think I'm correctly saying his name. A prominent researcher, senior researcher actually, architecture historian, conservator from Kaunas, who has been since all his career dealing with Lithuanian modernism. or the modernist architecture in Lithuania, which of course then deals with Soviet architecture as well. And as an architect, of course, he appreciates the architectural qualities, but then of course there is this difficult past attached to the buildings, but he pinpoints exactly, basically the same issues that you brought up. And he says that architecture, of course, should always, and of course I'm switching from sculpture, from monuments to built environment, but it should be always analyzed at least through scales, no? And scales in heritage are a known approach, but still to look for the universal themes, and in the case of modernist architecture is the modernism within, but then to always search for what he calls the local cultural reference. And what he identifies is exactly this reference to traditional Lithuanian architecture or traditional context. And his research showed that when looked through this lens, it is reappropriated. Although, and here it links again to what you were bringing up, all this attitude and also his research results started to change with the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. I think the article was published 23, so immediately after. It would be interesting to see what's happening now. And now we just have, because I see Irena looking at us, just perhaps a closing thought that could also work as a question to the public then. In this rapidly changing world, what do we do now with this difficult heritage? Because until recently, also heritage studies and all the theories surrounding and considering that heritage is in first place a process, not an artifact in itself. So also the dissonance within and the difficult character was something to be acknowledged, interpreted, reappropriated if needed. But in the current situation, and we are really in the present moment, and allow me to state it, Slovenia is a free country, so I will, not only during the war on Ukraine, but during the genocide in Gaza, which is a genocide, yeah, and the destruction of all sides. How do we deal with this difficult character of the past and the even more higher burden of the difficult past that we will create for the future? Yeah? And just as a reference, we are right now in the 25, when in the neighboring basically town of Nova Gorica, we have the European Capital of Culture with the slogan "Go Borderless," because there is the old Gorica in Italy and the Nova Gorica on the Slovenian side, and all the Capital of Culture connecting the two, promoting multiculturality, collaboration, and so on. But it's happening in a very moment of a very sharp, political stance of the Italian government. And in this framework, in all this promotion of cooperation, collaboration, a very symbolic site was restored. This is the train station in the westernmost building of Nova Gorica at the very border of Gorica. A building from the beginning of the 20th century. I'm sorry I don't have an image for those who don't know it, but you can picture a typical Austrian, well, typical but not typical, but anyways, so 19th century historicist building, in which during the restoration project, in the central hall, inscriptions from the fascist period were found, but during the restoration work, so there was no preliminary decision as to how to treat. Now, the doctrine, the conservation doctrine, follows the idea that all layers are equal, or at least they should be preserved, or at least all the valuable layers, and historically eloquent. This definitely was. So what was found was preserved. But then the question was raised immediately, is that okay? In a moment of radicalization of the global society, of Europe, and especially of this extremely fastly raising promotion almost of a fascist approach in Italy, is it really okay to just preserve? What will these inscriptions tell to the youth today that haven't learned the history of the youth of tomorrow? And so, of course, now there is a debate that it's slowly developing as to what to do with it, to hide it back and do damnatio memoriae, so erase it, which is a proposal of a part of the Slovene community because it's so hurtful. Do we do an intervention on top of it? So that's a question. So how to deal with difficult heritage in this extremely difficult moment, the present, marked by, to say the least, uncertainty. And linking back to foreseeing, what can we foresee? But I will let me add something more constructive. I mean, theory also says that heritage is also a platform for dialogue and mutual recognition. And perhaps if we take it from this side, let utopia live.
Yeah, thank you, Neja, but we promise that we will not talk too long, but I have an impression that you have just started. Now you can continue, but I believe it's time that we give an opportunity also to the public, perhaps for a comment, a question to all these issues, ideas, problems, questions that were open today.
The answers, maybe somebody has answers.
Just the question. Since I come from the field of tourism, which is usually, the one that we have to blame on all these troubles with heritage many times, I must ask you about the cancel culture. It's the new terminology in tourism. We have it, it's the cancel culture, which came out in 2020 with Bristol's UK, the devastation or the sinking Edward Colston's monument. He was the 17th century slave trader. So from that time, we call this cancel culture. And this kind of cancel culture appears usually with social media, goes spread all around. I know that also in Slovenia, where in Ljubljana, we had some ideas whether to remove the monuments or not, or even, sometimes even buildings are, as you have presented, it's a very good solution what Neja told for reasonable solution from the side of authorities and decision makers. Usually they're political decision makers. So did you face kind of cancel culture in Bulgaria? Because in western part of EU, there are these tendencies and they did it. But I haven't noticed, well, just by coincidence, in the rest of the Europe, former socialistic countries, I haven't noticed this. Did you face it in Bulgaria?
Neither have I. It's not what we can. What we can probably talk about in relation to Bulgaria would be different cultures of memory and contestation of one memory culture by the other one. One is more. That's why I titled my book Memory Archipelago, because these are like islands, separate islands in an archipelago. One would stress the traumatic side of the past, the other would be nostalgic. And so far, it's dialogue between them is almost impossible, but not really what is cancel culture, because cancel culture does depend on some measure of consensus, which we don't have. Maybe I should say yet, but we don't.
Thank you.
Yeah.
On that, especially in relation to the removal of sculptures in, let's say, the post-colonial discourse in the ex-colonial countries. and the famous Callstone and so on. And my students know these examples very well because we discuss about that a lot. Well, the heritage field proposes interpretation. So interpretation as the approach, and not any interpretation, because it's exactly not consensus what the heritage, at least heritage theory, seeks for, because consensus automatically implies silencing, a certain level of silencing. So what is promoted is what is called agonistic interpretation. So total pluralism. So adding to the existing plaques with historical facts, additional and additional and additional. Of course, let's skip the visual part of that. And of course, this is easy, so to say, when we talk about public monuments that can be enlarged, or so, not enlarged, but to which these plaques can be added. We can talk about agonistic interpretation in museums because we have space, of course, and it's a rhetoric question. How do we do agonistic interpretation in conservation when we have to decide which parts, architectural elements we keep? But as said, it's rhetoric. But that's a way that at least parts of the heritage field tries to offer some solutions.
Someone else, perhaps from the public? Comments, questions directly to our...
I have a question, but also my kind of opinion or comment will be in. So, what society, what we value today is the reflection, I mean, of all of us, and what we recognize as a monument and values, etc. So, I mean, we agree on that. But also, experts in heritage, in society, etc., should not influence on the real public opinion and to not kind of, how can I say, to not make some artificial thoughts about something or interpretate, but also some maybe fascistic, I would say, or nationalistic new ideas and movements should not pass. And how then to keep the real image and the reflection of the society, of the values, for example, that layer on the station, but also not to, I mean, it maybe not be ethical or moral to change and to make some artificial, how can I say, public opinion as some kind of authority on that, I don't know, heritage or like, I mean, in a scientific way. I hope it's a little understandable.
Do you have a concrete case in mind? Because it's perhaps easier for us to...
No, but for example, that layer, if I understand well, for that for station in Nova Gorica, they found like layer of fascistic past there. And the question for that, how it should be treated.
Can I briefly? Okay. The experts are the ones that are the most open, and they actually seek advice as to how to treat. Because one thing is the doctrine, is the rule, and the rule is when you find a valuable layer, you present it. Now the thing is that these inscriptions are fragmentary. Some you can read them thoroughly, and they convey a very obvious meaning. We guard the borders. Alpini and so on, all headlights of the fascist public rhetoric. But the question was, and well, I'm working with these conservators, the question was, now, if we follow the people-centered approach and talk to the Slovene community, you know what was the reaction of many, not all, but many? Come with the hammer and damnatio memoriae. It's basically damnatio memoriae, so erase it. But what happens, and here Hannah Arendt is very clear, the moment we forget, we allow it to grow again. Yeah? So in this case, the expert opinion supports this, let's say, the thought of the Enlightenment, basically, to not to forget and be a constructive. Yeah, of course, not to remove, not to erase, not to forget. But of course, is it enough to just leave it there? That's the point. They will definitely not, I think they will not remove it because also, as said, it's a professional decision. But is it enough to just preserve it? Or should it be interpreted? Yeah? We will see. At the end of the month, we're having a public debate on the topic. So we'll see what comes out in this participatory way.
Yeah, whatever you do with it, you leave it, you can send good or bad message and grow good or bad things. If you remove it, you can do the same thing. You know, it's the society on both sides, because we are dealing with the border, we are dealing with contested and so on. The society will have to, as you said, foresee in the public debate. So yeah, because I see all the scenarios, bad ones. If you leave it, it can be used for direct hatred across the board. Look what the bastards said when they were here. You know, it's easy. And if you clean it, then it can come from the other side, and then you can, you know, start tennis match. So, what was that?
I wanted to ask, how do you frame the role of scientists in this context? How do you frame the role of scientists in this context in the society? How you can contribute to, so you have all these questions of what to do, what to not do, and how to do it. And how do you see yourselves as a prominent community, and how you can contribute to the education, raising awareness, contribute to the better future for the next generations, and so on.
I will reply in one sentence and leave the mic to Daniela. I see myself, and particularly in conservation, as a mediator, as a facilitator that enables this heritage to become the platform of dialogue, but an active dialogue. So yeah, that's how I see it. Not imposing, but offering as much as possible of understanding, be it cognitive or emotional, because we always trigger both, particularly when we talk about heritage.
I completely agree with this. It's actually our responsibility to the society to be there, to mediate the dialogue, to foster a dialogue rather than an archipelago of different views or of different opinions. It's much easier to say than to do. I was wondering, I was thinking when you said real public opinion, which public opinion is real, because it's actually a force field, it's a terrain, it's an arena of contestation. And I would much more support or prefer what Neja termed the agonistic memory, rather than a consensus built on, let's say, a nationalist basis. It's very easy to build a consensus. Look, our nation, we Bulgarians, how we were great, or all that. It's much easier to build, and that's a kind of a baseline of consensus, the nation, the big, and it happens more often than I would like to see it. So yes, I think the researchers are there and the academics are there not to give answers, not to offer decisions, but to 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 foster deliberation, and be, of course, one of the voices or some of the voices in that deliberation.
But I wanted to ask, I come from the field of design, so I was constantly thinking, what are your tools? And now maybe my question is, what is your maybe personal tool to foster this dialogue? To have some like a certain technique or toolkit, or how do you approach this?
There is no recipe. In different cases, in relation to different cases, it's different. Yes. For example, I am engaged in a project related to that forced labor camp in Belene, and I take groups of students there to visit the place, and we talk about it, and sometimes they engage in some artistic work which I don't participate in. There are other colleagues who do that in order to feel the genius loci, the magic of the place. But in other cases, it would be different. So I don't think there's a recipe. We as citizens are not something different from us as researchers.
Well, as I said already in introduction, my main field of research and interest is participatory practices. So this is where I hope I do contribute. I think on a local level, I'm pretty sure that at least in some bits and pieces we did, and it is exactly by applying existing methods. There is an enormous array of methods how to try to open this dialogue. We borrowed it from urban planning, from social innovation, and so on. And there are specific methods that have been designed for the heritage field, especially. Since I'm dealing with this region that you understood, it's pretty contested, although it might seem more contested than it is in the lived everyday life. But still, it reflects on how also the monuments are being dealt with and protected. And is in relation to the built heritage that we try to implement this participatory way of particularly what I call it group memory talk. It's by making the community, the different members of the community together discover what are the shared values and confront the dissonant ones. I'm not saying it's comprehensive, far from that, because the very limit of any kind of mediation and invitation in such a dialogue is that your participants have to be willing to participate. Yeah, and one thing is and it's exactly in this room that we had a couple of these kind of events. You can very clearly see who is willing to engage. Is retired, aged people at least, not of course the oldest, but still early retired, and namely in this region, Slovenes and Italians. But it's very hard to engage with those communities that have entered this region over the last 20, 30 years. Yeah? So, but it is necessary exactly in view of this foreseeing, because they're the current inhabitants and they're creating their own collective memory and their own perception, I assume, in relation to these spaces. So, yeah, I trust in participation. So far, I still do. We'll see what the future brings. Of course, there's abuse within that. Some take over the role. Some represent others when they're not being chosen to be representatives. But okay, that's then let's more methodological debate. Yeah.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you to the public. Thank you to the colleagues. I think that we may conclude that today, in this rapidly changing world, as you said, is no common answer, is no rule, we have to adapt, we have to be adapted. But something that Michael mentioned, what could you do? The education, could you help? This is what we are actually doing. So also with education from the kindergarten, if you like, not from the university, is a possibility to change the opinion, to have an influence to the children, to build a better world, to understanding and so on, to know more. If you know more, you have more power, and everything that could help to build a society which will be more open, more understandable, and this society who will take care of heritage and, of course, be open to dialogue and collaboration. So thank you again. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Neja. I do hope that perhaps in the future we will be able to organize another cafe, another meeting with a challenging topic. Thank you. Good night.